Hey Internet, welcome back to What's the Points? I'm Mike. When I first got started, I did a video on the case against the Venture X. But with MX and Chase stealing all the spotlight now, I thought I would actually get back to the basics and evaluate, with the changes that those two banks are making, why there's never been a better time to have the Venture X in your wallet. So if that sounds interesting, please stick around, like, and subscribe. The argument that I made before was that this card doesn't yield enough positive value for people who are enthusiasts in this hobby. The observation that I had at the time was that everyone's saying that everyone should have this card regardless, because it's perfect for the beginner and it's perfect for the advanced player and so on. I made the case that it's actually not good for the beginner because the redemptions are harder to get really good value out of. And without being able to get reliably good value, with that price point, you're generally better off having other cards. But now the game has shifted a lot in the last year. And with never-ending increased series of coupons, credits, and everything, credit fatigue, it's a real concern. Our great friend and colleague, Stan the Credit Frog, has announced that he is going to be releasing fewer videos, partly due to his personal circumstances. But I do think it's interesting that he has been one of the most outspoken champions for simplicity in our setups and the value of simplicity when it comes to getting optimal value and not max value. And I think this is the most important distinction that's missed in most other reviews of these cards. Optimum does not mean maximum. It does mean getting the most value relative to all the different opportunities that you had. It means that all things equal, simpler gives you the win. And Venture now, the Venture X has that in spades. And so from my watch, they're really the only remaining premium travel card in the entire game that resembles anything remotely simple. Correct me if I'm wrong here. You could make the case that, for example, the US Bank Altitude Reserve, because it hasn't had any changes yet, might also fit this, but because it's not open to new applications, and more to the point, it doesn't offer transferable currencies. And so even though it's a travel-oriented card, it's still considered more of a cashback card than a points and miles card. So why did I change my mind? Now it makes sense to have this card no matter what, in my opinion. So in the case of a beginner, I would argue, hey, it's a good way to get experience with something that it's really hard to shoot yourself in the foot too much. And, also because of the way that Capital One approvals work, they tend to be extremely inquiry and new account sensitive, even more so than other banks that are notorious for that, such as Chase and Barclays, Citibank. You're better off getting it earlier in your credit card journey. So you might as well get that out of the way if you're at all interested in points and miles. Having said that, why not consider perhaps an equally simple card, such as the Wells Fargo Autograph or Autograph Journey, or for that matter, the Citibank Prestige? Well, a couple reasons. One, without getting too much into the math, I think that ironically, even with the almost $400 annual fee on the Venture X, it's still simpler and easier to get more than your annual fee back in terms of value than it is on those cards. Most importantly, it's a 2x catch-all. So having that card that that you can reliably put spend on no matter what you get without having to track any categories, and that it's a Visa without any international exchange fees, you can reliably take this around the world and know that you're always getting good value. Now, how good of value depends on how good you are at redeeming miles. And so this takes me to, why would someone who is more intermediate or advanced want to have this card regardless of their travel preferences, regardless of how many other premium travel cards they have? And that's because this card, it makes a good complement for other premium travel cards. And the reason why is that, in my opinion, most of the useful transfer programs that exist, at least for airlines, Capital One has at a 1-to-1 ratio for the most part. While you could look at them and say, well, they don't have transfer bonuses as frequently as American Express and Chase do, that's true. The reality is that When you find a redemption that works for you and it's a good price, then as you've probably learned, you got to snag that right away and ask questions later. And at most, hopefully, you'll be dealing with orphaned miles in that particular program that you transferred to. And hopefully it's a program that is not too strict about the expiration of those miles. And, that's just a risk inherent in this hobby with any issuer. So what is so strong about this? Why does it make such a good companion? Because the reality is, most likely at some point, sooner than later, you're going to want to book something with a program that does not currently have a transfer bonus. Now, some of them are more likely than others. For example, I think I've seen more transfer bonuses to Virgin Atlantic and to KLM Flying Blue with Amex and Chase than I have with Capital One. You're not always going to get that. And so therefore, when you see an option come up, let's say you need 75,000 miles to get from the west coast of the US to Amsterdam, which would be a really good deal. But let's say, for sake of argument, that you had 40,000 Capital One miles and 60,000 American Express miles. What would you do in that scenario, assuming that there was no transfer bonus? The obvious thing would be, is this a partner that exists for both of them? But also, what is your use case? Are there specific unique transfer partners that you could only do with one issuer or the other? And how likely are you to need that for that use in the near future? If not very likely, then maybe it doesn't really matter. You can use whichever you like. What am I getting at here? You might as well use those first, because the reasonable redemption value that you can expect from a typical Capital One mile, it's probably a little bit less than an Amex point. So you might as well use those first. But let's say that this redemption was a real aspirational trip. It was a first class flight for, let's call it 115,000 on any international carrier, right? Something that you've been wanting to do for a long time. Maybe one of those suites on board, that have their own windows. Maybe it even has showers. Who knows? I haven't tried any of that stuff yet. Hope to at some point. Right now, I'm happy enough with business class. Let's just say it was 115. I'm going to need to change the, 40 and 60. Let's just say you had 100,000 of each, Capital One miles and Amex points, okay? And you need 115. In this example, let's assume that this is a transfer partner for both programs, Capital One and Amex. The reality is you need 115,000, but you only have 100,000 in both programs. So do you see where I'm going with this yet? So you can make a transfer now from both Amex and Capital One into that chosen partner. Let's say, again, that it's Air France. However you choose to portion that. Maybe you do all of 100,000 from the Venture X because you just want to clear that out first. Maybe you do 50-50. I don't think that there's really a wrong way to go. I think that the only time that it gets really tricky is if you expect to use a lot of points with a particular transfer partner that is unique only to that issuer. And the more that's the case, then the more I would take this all of this advice with a grain of salt. But if you're like most of us and you're looking at the most popular programs, I don't think it's an accident that those programs, which tend to also have the best all-around usability and availability, also tend to be transfer partners with the most issuers. And so in that case, you can kind of effectively think of all of your points and miles as one big pool that can be transferred to any specific partner at a time. And so even if you're really into Chase or you're really into Amex, most likely there's going to be circumstances when it makes sense to spend on this card, and in doing so, build up your miles. If nothing else, you're going to be getting the 10,000 anniversary miles. And the fact of the matter is that if you have any interest at all in booking international business or first class, it's pretty reasonable to expect that you're going to get at least 5 cents per point. And so if you do, that means that 10,000 points that you got, instead of only being worth a nominal value of $100, is actually worth $500. Now, how often can you expect to do this? Well, it's a question of how flexible is your schedule. But even if you only do it once a year, and if you are flexible about where you're going, then without a doubt, you are almost certain to be able to get that $500 out of those 10,000 points, on top of the reasonably easy to use $300 travel credit that you get each year through the Capital One travel portal. I'm not a huge fan of travel portals. They have their use, and if you're willing to use them a little bit, I think it can help bolster the value that you're getting all around. So I haven't even mentioned the lounges yet. And if you care about that at all, they do have some nice lounges. Hopefully we'll see overcrowding diminish a little bit with these recent changes to restrict guest access to basically none without having to pay. I suppose the play would be that if you are traveling with someone that regularly enough to care about this, then yeah, have them apply for and get their own card so that they have their own access, since it is such an easy card to justify. And even if they're not that in the game, maybe try to focus on programs that allow for point pooling. So although that is one good thing about Capital One, is that they make it really easy to transfer points from one card holder to another. I think go to town. As many people that you regularly travel with as you can, get them their own Venture X. And if that's too much upfront fees to manage, too much complexity, I get it. But hey, this is not a simple hobby. Anything you can do to make it more simple is great. I think these days you might actually be able to argue that having 2 or even 3 Venture X cards in your family might be less work than getting positive value out of just one of the following cards: the Chase Sapphire Reserve, the Amex Platinum, certain co-branded cards like the Delta Reserve card, or the Citibank American Airlines Executive card. All of these cards have a more specific use case. I've talked about them, and I think that you could make the case that in certain circumstances, you're more likely to get better overall value with some of those co-branded cards. I haven't even touched on hotel cards because that does remain, in my opinion, one of the biggest weaknesses of most transfer programs. Particularly Capital One, I think you could make the case is the worst and has the least amount and least valuable of options for transferring to hotels. And that's fine, because if you're in the points and miles game, you're most likely looking to get some outsized value by flying, and almost always that's going to be from international business. So yeah, take another look at this card and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you have it yet? Have you tried to get it and you can't? Have you tried using the pre-approval tool? Did you find that that was important? Do you use it in this way that I have been talking about? Like, do you actually pool it in effect so that you can top off from both Cap One and from Amex into the same program at the same time to make a large redemption? Does that make it feel like you have more options? Because it does for me. And, I just hope they don't screw it up. Like in my opinion, I mean, Chase and Amex, there's a lot to like about both of them, but I think my appetite for managing a multitude of credits is definitely decreasing, and I want to be able to focus more of my energy on accumulating points in an efficient way, and having enough time to really learn how to make good redemptions and how to fit them into my schedule. Because that's always the biggest challenge. And I think for anyone who doesn't define their own schedule with really no external pressures, I think are going to be the most hard pressed to find some of these values. Because they really do sometimes require you to be able to travel very spontaneously or very last minute, or be super flexible about where you go. That last part might be a little bit easier, but I know for me, I'm always trying to book things far out. And in conclusion, I think that's the biggest weakness with all of these, is that all of these international carriers have very inflexible policies. The only real exception that I know of is Avianca, and that's only if you get their subscription. But then you got to deal with all of the headaches with Avianca. And don't get me started on Turkish miles and smiles. Thanks for sticking around. Hope this was helpful. Would love to hear from you in the comments. And let me know if there's any other topics that you are really wanting to see a video on. I'm trying to cover things from an angle that I feel is missing in this space, and trying to bring my own perspective to it from that. So good having you here, and let's all take care of each other. Ciao for now.